On March 22, 2018, the York Professional Firefighter Local 627 and the York City Fire Department were confronted with the grim reality that two of their own were no longer with them. Here to share their story is the president of IFF Local 627, Marc, and the fire chief of the York City Fire Department, Chief Chad Deardorff. Before we hear from our speakers, please turn your attention to the screens.
Family, friends, and other fire departments from across the region are in mourning after the tragic deaths of two York City firefighters.
Officials confirmed late tonight that two firefighters have died after a burning home collapsed.
Two firefighters were killed and two others were injured in a building collapse today in York County.
We're here tonight at what we know as the Weaver Piano Building. The building is a 4-story warehouse building that's under construction for residential units. Right now we got a major fire in the building. We're up to the 3rd alarm. Fire is still active, so still not under control.
Four firefighters became trapped in that home. Crews worked to free the firefighters. All four were taken to the hospital, where two of them died. 50-year-old Ivan Francia and 29-year-old Zachary Anthony.
Good morning. To start off, just give you a little background. The chief of the department at the time has retired, so I have been promoted since this position, or since this incident. So when you hear the different voice that you heard on the announcement, that's why. President Ott was the vice president at the time, so we kind of both stepped up into roles at the beginning of this year, and we're here to present on what we learned from our incident back in March of 2018.
Mayday, 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 mayday. We got firefighters trapped. York, give me a second alarm on a mayday.
Your copy, 1560.
Chief, get us far, get us far. Chief 99-2, far. Chief, I have 4 that went down. You have contact with them? Negative, not right now.
This is okay, but I'm not working out.
Repeat.
Firefighters walking. I think I'm okay, but I'm trapped. I can't get out. There's nowhere to start on me. I'm gonna hold tight.
Okay, do you have anybody else?
I can hear a passerby. Right there. Shut down the water supply. Shut down the water supply.
Engine 99.9, Chief 99.2.
Yeah, 995. I have 1. I need Jacqueline Brenshaw. Meet me on the Delta side.
Firefighters walking. I can hear. Firefighter. I can hear 996. Close the house.
Investigating 905, this is yours. 3.
Okay, 915.
Command New York.
Command, go ahead.
I need a mass casualty box. 5 BLS, 5 ALS to the scene.
Firefighters walking. I'm self-explicated. I'm retired. I have to get to the firefighters.
Saying 89-1 to command.
Command.
What would you like for an assignment for truck and engine 89-3?
Personnel.
You got it. This is the original fire bill, correct?
Correct.
1 minute out.
Truck 99-1 to command. Where do you need us? Personnel on the D side between the small building and the fire building.
Captain 995 to firefighter Anthony. Respond.
Truck, I need the spokes basket. And I need some webbing and rope rigging.
Lieutenant 1, Deputy 99, our truck's on the street. If you want them to respond, they're already out, available, full crew.
Engine 99.9 to command.
Command.
We're going to be approaching the scene. What do you need? You're from Chief 92-1. Do we have an office channel? Engine 89-3 is around. Engine 99.9 location.
First, all units not involved in the Mayday is going to utilize North 4. All units not involved in the Mayday, North 4, 1524.
Chief 99 Command, I got two located.
Copy. You have access to them.
Working on that now. I need another soap basket.
Copy.
Command, go ahead.
It's a very short blip of the actual Mayday, and I play that as importance for this presentation because, A, there was a couple things we had going on there. One, you could hear firefighter Swanson, who was one of the trapped, giving his description. But one of the lessons that we learned, which we'll talk about here shortly, was the radio traffic and departments that are self-dispatching, but not, I don't mean that negatively, they wanted to help. So not only do we have an incident within an incident, now we have departments trying to self-dispatch to give us assistance, which, as we sit back and think about it, I understand that, but it was difficult at the time. So this was a 2-day fire. Excuse me. We were dispatched for a structure fire with entrapment. PD and EMS actually reported the fire. It was during a snowy day. We had about 8 inches of snow on the ground. They reported smoke coming from this building. We were ultimately dispatched for this building fire with entrapment. We arrived on location. We had heavy smoke off the Charlie, the Bravo, and the AB corner of the building. It was a 4-story warehouse being converted into an apartment complex. The 4th story of the building was being ready to be occupied. We were already at the point of doing a certificate of occupancy for that 4th floor alone. As you can see, just some of the quick time frames here, just on when we requested the second. Another important part that I wanted to show here is originally we hit a Mayday at 17:07 on the 21st. There was confusion on the operations officer on who was with him, who was working, who was not working. Another lesson learned, which we'll get to later on. We ran into some issues with some of our apparatus and personnel not answering PARs. So again, stuff we'll get into here in a little bit. Ultimately, later that evening, command was transferred to the night shift duty officer. We work a 4-on, 4-off, so we have 2 shifts a day. They continued on their defensive mode overnight, and myself and the chief of the department came back in the morning, in which I assumed command again. About 9 o'clock-ish, we started an investigation into the calls. The bulk of the fire was knocked down. Myself, the building owner, the building owner's engineer, and the building code official entered the structure. At that time, the portion of the building on the front side, on the Broad Street side of the building, was still viable. It was deemed by the engineer that that building would be, that they could still utilize that building for future renovations, as the majority of the fire was on the back side. Around 2:30-ish that afternoon on the 22nd, we had a significant flare-up on the 4th floor between the ceiling and the unknown amounts of roofing material that were up there. So we made that decision about 15 minutes prior between myself, the chief, the 2 duty officers, that we were going to try and get in. 4th floor, just recon it a little bit, see what we had, see the safety factor, and go from there. About 14:35 hours, 2 firefighters entered the structure via the Division 4 window at the AD corner. I also entered the window with them to get some photos, to get just a peek of what we had as far as the investigation goes. About 15, 20 minutes later, 2 additional firefighters come up for additional help within the building. I was the command. I stayed on the 4th floor in the ladder truck. At that point, that was our best viewpoint. We felt that was the best part for us of where I should be. And we had a safety officer off to the back on the C side of the building, which was the chief of the department. About 15:15, we had a collapse that occurred on the Charlie side of the building where 4 guys went down. No warning. At that point, they were inside. They were actively engaged in suppression activities. They were actually the Chief Altman, who was one of the collapse, had just reported back out that they had a couple more spots and they were going to get out. So that's kind of our timeline for this event. By 15:30, Chief Altman was extricated, sent to the hospital. 15:38, firefighter Falancha was extricated. He was sent to the hospital in trauma arrest. 15:40, firefighter Swanson finally self-extricated. And then at 15:49, or 15:46, I'm sorry, firefighter Anthony was extricated, also in trauma arrest, and he was taken to the hospital then at 15:49. Days following the collapse. You want to touch on this?
Days following the collapse, we met with the families of the deceased. We assigned one of the guys that both passed away. One of their partners was their fire department liaison with the family. The mayor and his staff, York City Police, the Union Board, the International, the night of the collapse, can't thank Andy Penatellis enough from the 4th District. He was up there with us. Grady brought his peer counseling team up. So this is when we started rolling into starting to plan the funerals and everything like that.
So what we found on the days following the collapse up through the memorial service was the support from the International was beyond reproach. We would have been completely lost at this meeting if it wouldn't have been for Jim and his team showing up and them sitting down, handing us a piece of paper and saying, here's what we are doing, here's what you can do. You could do as little of it or as most of it as you want, but here's what's going to happen. It was a huge weight off of our chest from management perspective that they had this under control. Unfortunately, the IAFF has this down pat. But we are so grateful that they do. So continuing with the days after, keeping in touch with the family, their needs, proved trying, to say the least. Visiting the injured firefighters that were still in the hospital. We still had a department to run in the city to cover, so how are we doing that? And fortunately, we had locals from throughout the central Pennsylvania area that were willing to come in and do whatever we asked of them. The daily briefings with regarding the memorial service, the responsibilities that those things were getting taken care of for the service, the news media, so on and so forth. And on top of that, the community itself, just they came from every direction. Everybody wanted to help. We couldn't be everywhere at once. It was kind of a divide and conquer between management and the local representatives to get to different memorial services being held throughout the city. It was just difficult. And we had to maintain some semblance of donations that were being brought in. At one point, I know this is hard to believe, but we had fire stations with too much food. Everybody was bringing food after food and wanting to feed us and wanting to do this, wanting to do that. So how do we keep that in some type of check?
We kept an eye on all of our personnel. We made sure we stayed in contact with everybody, especially the guys on my shift that were working that day and the guys that were involved in the collapse. Stayed in communication with the deputy chief and chief nonstop. It brought us a lot closer in dealing with issues. Like Chief said, we were all left go off work, and we were covered by all the surrounding locals. They came in and covered our stations. All of our wives got together and made one big group, and the wives stayed in communication with each other because they kept checking on us.
You'll see a couple things here that may seem a little bit out of place. We were dealing with uniform issues for guys that haven't wore their Class A's in a couple years. Remember what I said about too much food? Some of the Class A's shrunk. So we needed to get Class A uniforms dealt with immediately. Just general personnel issues. Somebody doing or having issues more than somebody else. So we were dealing with that. And one of the things that we learned with having outside agencies cover the city was when I come into work, I don't really give thoughts of when we're dispatched, these guys have pagers, they have radios. Well, they didn't have this stuff. So we had to get in, get items for them to utilize to, if they didn't bring an engine, they were using ours, but then we had to get them portable radios, pagers, so on and so forth. Funeral services, each of the families wanted their own, and then we had the memorial service in between them. So it was 3 straight days of funeral services, which you can imagine the toll that took on some of the guys and their families. How do we get everybody transported? How do we get their needs met? How do we get them picked up to point A, to point B? Some had large families, so there's a lot of issues there. Do we get the equipment prepared? Is it in place? Personnel in place at appropriate time and location? Items taken to the services, their turnout gear, and whatever else the family requested. So it was a lot of logistical issues that we were dealing with. And again, without the strong management-labor relationship that we have, we wouldn't have been able to get through this. So after the services, as you heard from the representative from NIOSH, we had them. They reached out to us. Until this event, we had no idea NIOSH was a voluntary thing. We thought that was instant, they'd be coming in. So obviously we wanted a report done, we wanted this investigated, so we did get in touch with them and they came in. I'll let you touch on survivor benefits.
Survivor benefits, it's very important. A couple of the other gentlemen said, keep all your paperwork up to date. It was a lot of paperwork. It was a disaster at first. Survivor benefits came in good through the state, through the federal. We had help with getting the paper filled out. Anything we needed, we reached out to the international. They helped us. Other than that, it's still ongoing. The state, we just finally cleared up the state's payouts. But the big thing is whatever you do, keep your beneficiaries up to date and everything like that, because we ran into a whole lot of troubles in that part.
Of course, we have our stages of grief, our mental health issues, and I failed to put on here outside of personnel. So we were dealing with, and didn't really think about it, but we were dealing with a lot of personnel issues, mental health issues with the guys' children. That could have been my daddy. You know, they were very tight, didn't want to let go of them, didn't want them coming back to work. So now we're trying to help them with EAP and things like that. So that became a little bit overwhelming at one point. One thing we did was the chief and I brought in the union reps, and how do we deal with the emotional decisions? When do we take down the self-made memorials that people did outside the fire stations? How do we, what do we throw away? What do we keep? Who gets what as far as family members? So a lot of that stuff was done, again, due to the fact that we had such a good working relationship. Operational lessons learned. Obviously, we had a collapse early on in the building, on a different part of the building. The collapse happened of the fatality side. So where did we go wrong? So A, we should have had our own engineer in and not listened to an engineer's response from the building owner. Is that the deciding factor on it? Absolutely not. Many things have went wrong that day. I already touched base on the self-dispatching, the accountability. We're a small department that has, at the time we had 56 people. We had 10 guys working a shift. So we have low manpower. We had very little accountability. The incident command post was kind of roving. Our span of control was we don't have an officer on each piece. We could have one officer working per shift contractually. So we're looking at different opportunities there. And the one thing that we've discussed, and we've discussed heavily with the mayor, is how do we honor these two gentlemen? And this is how we honor them. We make the department better than what it was. We avoid this from happening again. And some of these are the things that we learned. And of course, as in any fire and anything we do, complacency kills. We've done these types of buildings hundreds of times. I mean, we're an old city that we have probably 300 of these style buildings in the city in 5.3 square miles. So we've done this time and time again, and nothing happened. So of course we have that going through our minds. How do we avoid that from happening again? The post-incident lessons learned. Again, I can't harp on it enough. The strong labor management relationship that we have has done wonders for us as a department, not only during this event, but other issues as well. The emotional issues you're going to deal with, we're still dealing with them. And the people that you think are on your radar, that are the ones that are going to need help, I could tell you standing here right now, we have two gentlemen down at the Excellence Center. Neither of them two were ever on my radar. So where does that put us as management and union leaders? How do we determine this? What type of education do we need to help determine who needs help, who doesn't? The emotional decisions, like I said, they were difficult. When do we take down the memorials? Who gets what? So you have partners that want to keep things from the guys. Families want things back. They want to memorialize them. You have some members of the department that don't want a memorial in the station. So there's that. Where's that fine line? Big thing we learned, and they talked a little bit about the beneficiaries, up-to-date photos. If your department takes a department photo individual photos for your department, make sure you keep doing that every couple years up to date. We struggled to find photos of these two gentlemen to represent who they truly were. We had a phenomenal aspect, or a phenomenal woman in our HR department that made things so much easier for us when it came to paperwork, the death benefits, the federal and the state benefits. She did a lot of things for us that she didn't really have to do. The support of the mayor and the staff was huge. The mayor was with us 2-3 weeks straight, every day. So his support, and we had a new mayor at this point, and we were 3 months into his term, and he already had an officer shot, and 2 months after us, he had another line of duty death in the police department. We haven't had a line of duty death in the city on either side since the 70s. So we were able to, fortunately, assist our police department turn right around in May and assist them with their line of duty death. I already touched base on the support. It was overwhelming in such a positive way. We're a very poor community. We had people literally not having a meal, bringing us flowers or bringing the guys something. So it was very moving. And I can't say enough about the IAFF and the help they gave us. President Shapeberger, your personnel did a phenomenal job. We would have never gotten through any of this without the help of Jim, 4th District Vice President, and their staff. It was moving and very extremely helpful. And then we ran into one last problem. How do you thank everybody without inadvertently missing somebody? And the union came up with a brilliant idea, and we took out billboards.
We had a company come in that has a bunch of billboards all over York County, offered us to do free billboards. They gave us 11 billboards free. They came up with the design and everything, and they left them up for, I think, 60 days to help us thank everybody.
So we took out an article or a thing in the paper, but the billboard was significant. It was a brilliant idea. That way, we did not inadvertently miss somebody and slight somebody for everything that they did for us. So one thing we did have that we actually did prior to the release of the NIOSH is the mayor convinced the mayor and council that we hired 9 additional people, so we're now up to 65. Thank you. That was a huge benefit for us. We're still working on items. Obviously, we don't have an unlimited pot of money, but we're working on items with that. Currently still working with the mayor on approval for company officers. We run 3 engines in a truck. I'm trying to get at least 3 officers per shift as lieutenants. Incident command post being established instead of just a roaming one. It's been a learning curve with our officers. Myself and the deputy are the only 2 that aren't in the bargaining unit, but with the support of the local, they've really been pushing 2 for this with the officers that are in the bargaining unit. So again, a learning curve. It's something we've never done. It's always, we've roamed and roamed and roamed, and now we're trying to establish that incident command post. Process of establishing an incident command or an accountability policy, which is how do we do that with recall? Again, I think I might as well just bring him into my office because he's probably there more than my deputy, because we're always looking for ways to increase and do things better and more efficiently. And of course, additional training. We hit a really rough time with the PAR checks. So that was significant for us. So we're looking at just different training scenarios and different ways to train and work with other departments that went through similar things on some of the lessons they learned. So again, I'd like to thank the IAFF for having us to discuss what we learned from our tragedy in hopes that it prevents somebody else down the road from having the same tragedy. Thank you.
Thank you.